this old-fashioned way, as he frames it, it has a lot to do with the love of the pictures, you know? That's what Marcus has, that's what Jonathan has, that's what James has, that's what we have, you know. We no matter what we do, I have incredible conversations about Godard with James. I go to obscure movies with Marcus at Berlin Film Festival and fall asleep, you know. We do all of those things together, but really the passion for the individual movies and the idiosyncrasy of each movie and serving each movie is what Marcus is speaking to, is why Marcus has been there 20 years and is thriving better now than ever before, and is why we're still here, and also gives incredible credibility to Jonathan and James as well.
You know,
so I'm just saying, there's room for all of this, you know?
James, you know, a couple years ago, Jack Foley brought a film to the producers' conference in which he laid out the swimming pool, in which he laid out the range of things that you would do to take that film out. Yeah. It was stunning. And I mean it. I mean in a serious way. I think Jack Foley's one of the best people in the business, without question. But here's a film which French film, nudity, new stars, old stars, different things. They're qualities to exploit. He had thought through 50 different ways in which he was going to try to reach audiences. Is that old-fashioned?
It's, you know, weirdly, what Peter is describing is of course what happens in a company that functions at whatever level. You know, you're going after every possibility to exploit the potential for a film to become, the way we put it, part of a conversation. And once it becomes part of a conversation in whatever audience you're trying to reach, if that conversation takes critical mass, you've succeeded. You've lit the fire. So yeah, this is why we have a really fun time. I have to say, we have a blast because we take movies that are kind of weird and go, how do we get people who a week before would never have thought to be having a conversation about this topic and this stuff, whether it's milk or whether it's swimming pool, and have them think that they can own a piece of that conversation. So, you know, and we're in the same scramble for rationalizing these various windows and streams and ancillaries and markets, and this is, I mean, it's all the same thing. I think that, to Michael's point, yeah, empowering filmmakers to know what that process entails and giving them the option when, you know, we're gatekeepers, I only have a certain number of slots a year.
I guess one of the questions I have, and jump in, several of you guys, is the arithmetic about revenue and goals. You know, if 20 years ago when a film made $1 million in the independent world, that was significant. I remember sitting here noting the films that had made $1 million that year. By the end of the 90s, it was 10 million. Now it's 25 plus, and when you talk to companies like Searchlight or sometimes what you were doing, Mark, at Warner Independent, you had a different strategy for what was considered success. So even though Peter can talk about revenue returning to the producer, from a company viewpoint, you guys have a different strategy about what the numbers were that you're playing.
Is that briefly? I think that's a perception, it's a misperception. It has to do with the way in which all these, and you're talking really to specialized divisions of the studios. Some of them are more domestically based, where the numbers you're throwing around are actually probably accurate. For somebody like me, I mean, look at one of our biggest successes this year was In Bruges. Yeah, it did over $7 million here. That would smell by these standards you just said as a failure, but we made essentially a local Irish movie that's one of the biggest commercial successes in the history of Ireland. And
we liked it as well.
We loved it here. It was the opening night here, but we knew what we were going into with the economics of that. And as you're seeing in the trades, if you're following our little story, we're at Focus. We've always been that company that has always squeezed money out of every corner of the world, and that also means that we take talent from every corner of the world. We take that mission seriously. Less Caution is a gigantic hit. It's one of the biggest hits in the history of Asian cinema. It played like a long, boring, weird S&M movie here in the States. So it's like, you know,
this really goes to the point. Look, there's a lot of different ways to think about this, and what Michael said is correct. Everybody who's going to succeed up here is going to do so based on the quality of the emotional content. And then you got to think about one other thing, which is how much does it cost and how much do you think you might make? What Peter's doing works brilliantly. But if that movie cost $15 million, it would be a disaster. Of course it doesn't. What Michael is doing every day works brilliantly. I mean, that's an extraordinary business he and Tom have run for forever, and it's made a massive difference in the culture of this country, and we should all be grateful for that.
Thank you.
And everybody on this panel is involved with a lot of quality movies. That's why I love Sundance too. You can finally come up here and have a conversation about emotional content and cultural content, and not just about cash. But then there's that thing called having to pay for it. And yes, it's true. When you spend a ton of money, you have to go make a ton of money. But there are a lot of different ways to do that. And if you look at all the analysis of the long tail and how that's going to work, what we're kind of talking about here is, yes, if you spend very little money, the long tail is a marvelous thing, which is the sort of infinite bookshelf. It's all stored electronically and doesn't cost a lot to distribute. And when you're spending a lot of money, you have to do, as the Harvard Business School studies show, you have to be in the winners take all business. It's really increasingly about the bigger hits are winning the day. So if you want to be, for example, in the business of spending 15 or 20 or $30 million on a movie, it's no longer acceptable to say you're going to release that on a few screens and hope for the best. You have to know you're going to be over 1,000 screens. You have to know you're going to spend a ton of money, and you have to make a ton of money or you're going to be gone. I mean, Paramount Vantage, unfortunately, is the poster child for how not to do this. I'm sorry to say it, but they lost $150 million in their first 3 years. That takes work.
But Mark, just, we're doing Che right now with Stephen, and budgeted reports are anywhere from $45 to $65 million production. They probably got 90% of that out of international, but, I guess the point I'm trying to make is we don't need, and they don't need, the investors don't need to make $20 million.
Correct, and that's fine, because Wild Bunch did a great job internationally. That's totally acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
So
But they may not have people to sell the next movie to because they bankrupted them on those sales this year. So I mean, come on, It's,
But I guess why I'm bringing all of this up is because
to your point, Jeff, there are many movies we'll do $1 million with, and at the box office, and still be considered a success.
Right.
Yeah.
And that has to do with all the different media now, the different ways of exploiting the film, whether it's television or DVD or online, which everyone hopes will improve in revenues over time in the future, airlines, international. And it's very important when you see that box office number that you do a little research about those other aspects, like with the way James described in Bruges. That's very important in the current market.
I mean, I think, again, the reason I bring this up this way is because I think one of the basic problems with the discussion is that we sometimes are really dealing with apples and oranges type of arguments in terms of films. It's very, very hard to talk about a $10 million film as being distributed the way that Peters talked about distributing it, and whether or not there'd be any possibilities for return the way Peters talked about distributing it. And conversely, what the specialized divisions do, whether or not they put a lot in their pocket or not, is really have changed in the way that the marketplace is. I look at what's at Sundance right now, and I can go through the range of different film costs here that literally go from the 20 plus down to the way under one range of costs, and they're all being dealt with as if they're in the same world, and they're not.
Right.
And that's part of the problem. What The Good Dick is going to deal with is different than what, for that matter, even In Bruges was going to deal with. And what's coming out of this year's festival, I could go through a range of things. The success of A Little Miss Sunshine is wonderful. Those are the breakout examples that everyone then uses as a model, and it's a false model.
Right.
What I'd rather look at is what happens to the films that are made at this level of a price. What do they need to do to recoup? And how much is this market capable of doing that? And if it can't do that, what are the possibilities for that? And then conversely, going back to what Marcus, Peter, Jonathan, other people are doing, what about the lower budget work? What about the work that doesn't get into that theatrical release that same way? Are there possibilities for that work to do? So first you, Ted.
I think it all comes back, we're talking about films here, but it all comes back to the filmmakers. The people that make Little Miss Sunshine or any of the films that we've talked about, from the highest to the lowest, when I talk to them, they all have the same question, which is how the hell do we survive? How do we get our bills paid? Movies like In Bruges, like that, we don't have government subsidies of any form here in the U.S. for the arts. Yes, we have some tax rebates, that kind of help with the financing, but how do filmmakers survive? How do we develop those projects that actually can drive the numbers that Mark talks about? Or how do we even get a chance to, grow our craft by experimenting with the lower budgeted stuff? That's the question that often comes back from the people I collaborate with, just the day-to-day survival. And frankly, that's where it seems to me something has to change in a really big way. I got to enjoy for a while an overhead deal, courtesy of Mr. Seamus, which paid far too much of my bills for what I delivered to him. That model, has wisely probably gone out the window. But questions of much more of how can the different distributors, how can all of the industry apparatus work in a much better partnership so that filmmakers can kind of plan what that long-term sustainability is. And to me, that's when it comes back to doing things a lot differently and encouraging that type of behavior and having a structure that allows for that. Whether it's, as Peter, counsels filmmakers to do, to arrive at Sundance with 2,500 DVDs of a special edition that you will sell privately for a high price point, and know confidently that's not going to scare off Michael Barker from acquiring your film later. Or when you sell your film for those pennies that Jonathan supposedly pays, he pays. I'd be happy with any of those things myself, particularly if he also made a commitment to share the data of where people are who are downloading, who are paying for that film on VOD. That system provides incredible information about where people are, what their habits are. Can that be shared? Or just for an exhibitor to just be able, for a distributor to actually say, Monday nights are our weeknights. We're going to give that back to the exhibitor so that they can all hopefully become like the Wexner and the Walker or other not-for-profit centers that sell out every single screening of a movie because they have a united community, that they're the community center there. Those changes have to occur if there's going to be a sustainability to continue to have the large number of films that are produced each year, despite whatever their budget is, come here to Sundance.
Right. I mean, and it's not just pennies, Ted. You know that. One of the things that Ted, everybody else is talking about are the partnerships, and I think that's the real thing that we've seen that requires change, and that we're trying to address. We launched something called Festival Direct about a year ago, where we are putting movies from the leading film festivals around the world straight to the on-demand platform. And we've expanded that. We're doing close to 7,500 movies a year on that platform. These are movies that, Marcus, Michael, everybody has passed on distribution because it's just really hard to get a return on investment out of the theatrical marketplace. But in working with filmmakers, and we've, Marcus and I partnered on a couple of things, and, we've talked to some of the people that Peter worked with. That, I think, in terms of where we are and how we distribute movies is really critical. And, to James's point, it's working with festivals. Filmmakers should look for as many partnerships as possible and to go out and promote.
And you guys actually have also quite a range of work that I think you've, over the years, dealt with in terms of different budget levels. You've done the
We've
range.
tried it all, Jeff. As you know, we
I
have.
know you have. I mean,
We've
we've
tried
had a lot of them
we've
here.
tried it all, but we've got a model now that and Ted, if you sold us a movie, we would give you numbers. It's as simple as that. We provide producers reports. There were a couple of producers at a little thing we had earlier.
I mean, one of the reasons why this panel is what it is, and James' admonition about the fact that I wish it was more diverse and there were different worlds, is that I wanted a discussion about the theatrical universe. Yeah. I wanted a discussion about what people think drives all of our business. I don't have Netflix up here. I don't have Amazon sitting here. We didn't go bring in the iTunes guys to talk about what's
Jeff,
going on.
but
That's happening someplace else.
But they're all
It's
part of.
important in
they're all
answering your
part of what
last
we do.
question that all the people out here know. There are a much wider array of buyers here than the
Right.
people at this table, and this is another moment of excitement for the future.
Michael, I was
You've
just...
got Hulu,
you
you've got
interrupted me
iTunes,
before I
you've got
finished
all
my
these.
sentence was exactly the sentence I was making. The thing that people don't understand is that there are in 10 years ago, there were about 6 specialized divisions, something like 30, 35 distribution companies. Last year, there's something like 100 distribution companies, maybe a little bit less, I forget what the final number was, and twice the number of specialized divisions. The good news is that there's so many different companies out here competing for different product that create the kind of possibilities for deals. The bad news is very few of them are significantly funded at any level in order to being able to get into this marketplace and can actually deal with the competitive minefield that is the theatrical world that we're facing right now. Getting into screens, staying on screens, having all the problems that people face. So we'll go back to this in a second. I just wanted to say that, throwing back down to Peter and Marcus, that going back to the question again about budget levels and low budget work, is that there's clearly a different world right now that documentary, low budget, experimental work, the substance of what Sundance largely is, and as much as people want to talk about the big hits all the time, and what's the universe for that? And Marcus, we talked about this many, many years. Go ahead.
I mean, for us, we're exploring things like with Amazon and doing partnerships with them. It's strange because like 2 years ago, we bought an IFC movie called Puccini for Beginners. And we did the deal with John Sloss. And he came to us.
The devil to everybody up.
And we ended up figuring out this.
John, are you here? I just want to know because all right.
I'm sure there's someone from one of his minion are here, so the report will get back.
So let's just say this right now. Do you know the story about John Sloss? Every time somebody lies at Sundance, John Sloss gets a royalty.
Okay, so we split it up. We split it up with.
Even John laughed when Mark told him that joke, by the way, just so you know.
I'm
No,
not
he
sure he's
threatened to hit me
laughing now, but that's a whole other. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
We split this up with us retaining the theatrical and the home video part. We did the broadcast deal with both Logo and Showtime, and then we ended up working with Netflix on the home video part. And we all became partners and did these series of ways to do grassroots marketing where everyone paid for their own resources to get the film, the word of mouth out to the film. And it did really well, for that kind of film. And in terms of a partnership, it couldn't have been any better. So there are ways to structure those kinds of deals as a filmmaker, as an independent filmmaker, if you don't get acquired. I guess you can build with your sales agent or your producer or your attorney, whatever, a series of ways to structure a distribution plan for your movie. And I guess Peter's got various ways. Like every movie we have has a different profile of how we're going to take it out. Some may just have a limited release in a couple markets. And really, for us, we use that as a way to get the word of mouth out nationally for the film and build a profile.
Peter.
In the old world, filmmakers had reactions. They didn't have strategies. So they go to Sundance and see what happened. They choose the best offer, the lesser of evils. In the new world, people need strategies where they're thinking about their core audiences, they're thinking about their potential partners, they're thinking about the best way to split up rights. And for all the filmmakers I'm working with, whether they're making fiction or nonfiction, they all want to try theatrical. Yeah. But the way they try theatrical is they work with a booker or they do a service deal. Maybe they start in 1 or 2 cities, they test it, and they see if they can go further. And the price of service deals these days ranges from $25,000 to $100,000. Now, I know other distributors say they can't open a movie for less than $1 million, but movies that have, there's a film called Note by Note, a documentary that's played for over a year. It's making money theatrically. He started with $10,000 to finance his theatrical service deal. So I think theatrical can be an important part, but what I say to clients that I work with is, do not spend more than 10 or 15% of your resources on theatrical, whether it's money or energy or psychic, whatever, so that when you go to city by city and not enough people show up and you don't sell enough tickets, you're not so downhearted that you give up on all the other things that are important. And going back to James's point about the way that movies are made, a lot of these filmmakers are making movies out of personal passion, about issues, about content. They're movies they have to make. And they're partnering with national organizations, nonprofit organizations that are supporting doing group ticket sales, they're doing house parties, they're using them educationally in hundreds of ways, and those partnerships can be as important as partnerships with distributors in different areas.
James.
Look, the pink elephant is really very specific and very simple. We talk about the Sundance Film Festival. We talk about movies. Look, guys, just the economic ontology of what theatrical is in this, it is simply a form of ideological massaging you as filmmakers to make you think you're making movies, while at the same time spending money, it's a loss leader, on advertising for what the business really is, which is stuff that comes out of a box. That's his business. And he's got a great model, but it's my business too. I'm in the same business as he is, except he's got the cable channel and I don't. That is to say,
You had a cable channel.
I know,
Yeah,
I know. It was not my decision to sell it off. He took over that
just acquired
Sundance.
it.
James,
Yeah.
can I put one thing in here as
Yeah.
a codicil to what you're saying?
Yeah.
Is that there's an aspect of the theatrical profile, and trust me, I know from having a library of over 18 years, that will stick with a title through all the media over years
the
and
point.
years and years. And
That's it.
And it's long-term thinking. I think a lot of the reasons these companies failed that Mark is talking about, yes, it's a financial one, but it is strictly thinking in the moment, not thinking long-term. I would not be here if I didn't have that library. Marcus wouldn't be here if he didn't have that library. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have that library. But that there is something to be said for the theatrical profile to give a long life for a film.
This is the pink elephant. In other words, if the movie smells like it was a theatrical movie, that is, it went through the motions and they cost money. I mean, a few movies make money theatrically as against their negative cost, maybe 0.03% of them. But the rest of the time, we're just going through the motions. The way I put it to my students is very simple. It's Friday night, you're calling or texting somebody you want to have sex with, and you say, hey, you have an option. Hey, do you want to go watch an IFC video on demand download in my dorm room? Or do you want to go to the movies? Well, if it's the first date, you're going to say, let's go to the movies. If it's the third date, if you're lucky, it's going to be him. But what you're really doing when you say, let's go to the movies,
I want that in the textbook, James. I want that written in the textbook.
what you're really saying to that special somebody, when you say, let's go to the movies, is if there was a subtitle that was the truth, the economic truth, it would be say, hey, do you want to donate to James's advertising campaign for milk for the DVD release? That's what you're doing.
Right.
You're just putting money into because that's all it is. So the ideologies that we attach to that piece, it's such a hugely important investment, as Michael points out. That's the key. Just one really quick point to what Ted said, because he's speaking directly to just the age of this panel, but also the future of a lot of the people here. What is the sustainability of an alternative culture worldwide, but here in the States, let's speak to the States. And this is what I mean by a political side. 80% of your worries about the sustainability, how people can make a living doing, as Peter said, what they have to do. They have to speak out. They have to say something.
But
They do it.
let me-
Well, let me finish the sentence. 80% of that would be single-payer health care. It would be real investment in education, so there's no college loans, instead of just having a nation of beggars with college degrees. It's very simple economic politics. We're not necessarily getting it with this new administration yet, but keep that in mind, because if 4 years from now, that administration is back in power, but with the sense of a real politics of the culture that says the way this culture sustains itself is that way, there'd be a lot happier story up here.
But let me ask my incredibly naive question. Do films have to be dated? Can films be released and sold the way books might be at different points? Is the long tail theory of putting something on a shelf and keeping it there, is it an absurd proposition to talk about where the future will bring us? Or is the theatrical world so entrenched that we're never going to leave it?
Well, for the short term, it is splitting into two very clearly. There are those films that go theatrically, and then there's what Peter's doing and what Jonathan's doing, where there is absolutely a market. It's just smaller. And the good news about it is it may be smaller, but it's actually growing a lot. And where it will really grow a lot is the point at which you can take your mobile device and shoot it into that. And there are a pile of reasons for that. The main one is, of course, that it'll cost you $2 or $3 instead of $10, $14, $15 for a DVD. And what I see with my son, who's 11, is he doesn't care what format the movie comes in. He cares about how fast can he get it and how can it get right to where he is right now. And I think that's what's coming our way. So yes, at the moment, everything is driven by theatrical. On anything over a couple of $1 million, you're just stuck. But it feels to me like in the longer term, it will probably be two very vibrant markets, one of which will be when you're making Spider-Man 12 or whatever that is at that point. Yeah, you're stuck having to go out in the theaters and spend the money. But there probably will be another version of it where you'll pay a lot more to get something early. Maybe you'll pay $15 or $20 to get something a couple weeks after it's in theaters to shoot it to your cell device, and then you can pop it into your home. And the reason ultimately this will probably all work, of course, is it's the answer to piracy. Because when it comes to your phone, it'll have a unique code on it. It'll get charged to your phone bill. And unlike every internet service provider who now says, I don't know nothing about birth and babies. If you want to steal everybody's content, that's fine with me. Just pay your cable bill. It doesn't work, right? I mean, that's the problem. In Spain, they've got 2/3 of the movies are being pirated every week. It's unbelievable. And what do the ISP providers say in Spain? Oh, I'm sorry. We can't really do anything about that. Phone companies are going to be the answer to that.
Yeah, Jeff, can I just jump in? I mean, I think you addressed it, or somebody here said last year, 2 years ago, there were 700 movies released. Next year, they're going to be 350. That doesn't mean that I would say of the majority of the independent filmmakers in the audience that they're going to stop making movies. I mean, one of the problems is there are very few gatekeepers up here, and there are very few movies that can get released theatrically that either somebody thinks is going to make money. So, I think a lot of people, and when we were talking about the future, how do you get your movie out there? And how do you get audiences? How do you reach audiences? I mean, Mark, when we see one of our movies on Canal Street on DVD, we're thrilled because in all likelihood, that's marketing for us. I mean, even though you think there are a lot of really small films that they may be taking some money out of our pocket, but you know what?
That's promotional service.
That's
basically.
promotional. I mean,
It's
it
also
is.
because you have so little investment in the negative cost in the marketing. And
That's right.
So
Well,
you
and
have
when
that
we are
luxury.
talking about really completely different things up here, and I'm not sure. You make more movies than you buy, don't you? You're
By about 8 to 1.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of an alternative for an independent filmmaker, you're a gatekeeper that it's a one. You do one a year, and same with Searchlight, same with aside from Michael and Marcus and ourselves, in terms of acquiring movies and getting them out for distribution. You can't release that many.
But that's why I'm trying to talk about this world and talk about where the openings are. Go, Ted.
I mean, to me, the question also comes down to what kind of movies do you want to see? Because under where it is right today, there are two types of movies you can make. Those that have a number after it or can justify the numbers that Mark, speaks about, or basically a film that costs under $500,000.
Right.
As James talked about, my annual budget, 15% of my income goes to pay for health care. How do I survive to actually try to generate the movies that Mark wants? I can't personally survive, making movies for $500,000. What are we going to do? I mean, the system's evolved to a point where it's really wonderful for all the buyers, right? This fall at Toronto, we had a really huge bidding war for The Wrestler at $2 million. If that's what the top price is going for, how am I going to go speak to my equity investors and say, this $6 million movie that I want to make, we anticipate, getting a top, if we're at the very top of the industry, 33% of our budget for. All this is really self-defeating. You guys will get supplied films by only the rich and the young, because that's all that can afford to make movies under the current climate, unless we seriously rethink it on the question of how do filmmakers actually survive so that they can grow and evolve, like all the great filmmakers that have come out of Sundance, like Soderbergh, Nolan, or so on and so forth.
Jeff, I just want to talk about one thing we haven't talked much about is the internet, which is the true disruptive technology in terms of distribution, if you ask me. And some of the traditional distributors are using the internet a little bit. They have websites. James has a cool website. But I don't think they're sort of stuck in things that have been working for them in the past and haven't figured out how to take full advantage of it. But independent filmmakers are using the internet, and in some cases, and I'll just mention one documentary and whether or not people like the content of the film, which is The Secret. When The Secret came out, they decided not to be in theaters in the United States and not to be in retail. They sold it first off a website exclusively and through some organizations. And then eventually they got publicity on TV, Oprah, and other places. And in the first year, they sold 2 million DVDs. That's
Wow.
a fair amount of money.
That's a lot.
And they did that by viral marketing online, by going to core audiences, and by
positive
reaching
thinking.
those people effectively. And the filmmakers who are doing well selling directly from their websites, if they're selling a film for $24.95 plus shipping and handling, they're making $23 profit per sale.
Yeah, but Peter, I mean, my problem isn't with films that have, to me, already visibility, like something that's a secret. I mean, I'm trying to talk about things, again, that go back into this market that don't have stars, don't have preordained audiences because they've been based on a book or a television show like what studios do. I mean, I forget what the number was. Maybe it was a couple years ago that the 10 top grossers from the studios, 2 were original screenplays, and everything else was either an adaptation or a sequel. And the point is that I'm trying to say, okay, take that same formula and go into the independent arena.
And that's even a
let's look at
generous use of the word
that
original,
doesn't have
yeah.
visibility. How does it find that visibility? How does it create a revenue stream for itself? And what are the upside potentials for this? Years ago, the reason I brought the number thing up, in part, was to say, years ago, the numbers were really small. We made films for very little money. Fairly little money came in terms of the revenue stream, and the companies survived until there was the breakouts, until Sex Lies finally went to make 35 million instead of the films before that broke through. The same thing's right now happening on the DVD side, not for The Secrets, but even for the smaller films, in terms of what revenue streams are. They're not producing the numbers yet that we need to see to pay for Savages being produced on an internet revenue scheme. I want to see whether or not that strategy can be rethought.
Well, here's the problem. There are two things that get in the way of that have changed in addition to that get in the way. One of them is the exponential increase in advertising costs. Generally speaking, media costs have gone up between 12 and 18% a year, and inflation has been, 2, 3, 4%? So it's way out of whack with what you pay for food or anything else. And at the same time that they're charging you more and more and more, their audiences are shrinking. So it's the worst of all worlds. You pay a lot more for less. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, of course, is it's not like you're dealing with 3 networks and your local movie theater and those are your choices for Friday night. You have a gazillion choices now you didn't have before. Let's start even with just cable television, which now chews up 50% of the eyeballs that watch TV every night. It's gigantic, and its quality's better all the time. Obviously, of course, you've got YouTube, you've got every video game known to man. All these things have exponential growth that you don't think is going to come from nowhere. It's coming from somewhere. It's taking a piece out of people going to the movies. So all that's done, those two things, has made it a hell of a lot harder to get through.